any press is good press, right? If we were still in the Jerry Maguire era, that statement would probably be true, but it doesn't seem to apply in this current environment with a bankrupt specialty retailer in the midst of one of the most challenging periods in American business history. If you are a regular on my channel, this is actually the 6th video, if you count this one, surrounding the GNC soap opera over the last 5 months. And honestly, at this point, I feel like GNC should be a client of mine for all the extra research that I've been doing on their brand. And with a pending court case coming up this week, it's probably not going to be the last video that you guys see. But in this video, I want to kind of cover 3 things. First is just the highlights, financial highlights of the Q2 earnings report that just came out last week. I also want to catch you guys up on some of the bankruptcy Chapter 11 filing since the last video that I uploaded on July 12th. And then also just kind of talk around like what ifs on the bankruptcy filing. So let's just kind of start with the revenue numbers. In the Q2 of 2020, GNC had revenue of $343.5 million, which is down a staggering 37.5% year over year. And on a quarter over quarter sequential basis, it was down 27.3%. So what comprises of that loss of about $190 million in revenue year over year? So about $109 million is coming from the corporate same store losses, and about 65% of that they're saying is coming from like COVID challenges. They also had around $25 million coming from loss of sales in the US franchise businesses, about 11 million coming from same store losses on the Canadian store business. Similarly, on the international business, $11 million. You also had $4 million or so in a contract ending in terms of, I think, private label products at PetSmart. You had about $3 million in store optimization. And then the rest of that is coming from the closure of the manufacturing facility, some of the international JVs, some of that revenue that they lost from that, and then also some inter-segment sales. Gross margins were also hit during the quarter, was 29.4%. That's down a massive 690 basis points year over year. If we break the revenue down by domestic and international, the domestic side had just over $300 million in revenue. That was down 36.9% year over year. In terms of like same store comp numbers, these are pretty bad. 32.4% down on same store comp numbers on the corporate side. The franchises did actually decidedly better, and I think that comes down to some of them being run by some very aggressive, creative franchisees that their back was against the wall. This is their livelihoods, and they wanted to make sure that they could get anything out of that, out of the local community. A lot of them businesses have done a good job at being a part of the local community, being a health beacon in that community. And the US franchises were only down 17.6% on a same store comps number. So still extremely bad, but much better than the US corporate side. International business was $28.9 million. That was down 26.7% year over year. They're saying that's mostly because of a lot of the COVID closures or restricted living in a lot of their biggest territories, such as Hong Kong, Mexico, United Arab Emirates, and Singapore. Now, if you look at GNC from their digital business, this is kind of a shining light, and obviously there's just a terrible quarter. So when I say good, put that in context, please. They had 17.6% of their total sales coming from digital. That was a total revenue number for the quarter of $52.8 million. That was up 18.1% year over year, and also up sequentially on a quarter over quarter basis of 17.4%. While those numbers are improving and good, it really should be much higher if you consider the GNC's latest presentation, which projects e-commerce will do $246 billion in the calendar year of 2020. If we consider the first 6 months, the digital sales number is only $97.8 million. So will more people turn to digital in the second half of 2020? I think that answer is yes. Will it be 50% more on average than during the quarantine period? No. I'd guess GNC is going to land somewhere around $210 million at the end of 2020 for the digital sales number. The good news is they only projected $260 million for the calendar year of 2021, which I think is very likely at 24% growth based off of my projected $210 million in 2020. For them to get to that $246 million in 2020 total digital sales, I think they would need to improve a lot of their omni-channel fulfillment capabilities. And in their current environment, especially dealing with Chapter 11 and all of that kind of stuff, taking up a lot of their time and them not wanting to put in a lot of like capital expenditures, I don't see them leaning into curbside pickup or hyper-local fulfillment. Those things are going to go on and they're going to add incremental locations each quarter. But to get to that point where they are going to get to their digital sales goals for 2020, I don't think they're going to put in the investment until they get themselves out of bankruptcy. If we look at revenue in terms of like product categories, just so you guys can understand like during the quarter what kind of happened with some of the different product categories, especially with COVID-19, I think there's a lot of information going on around like which categories did well, which ones didn't do well. In terms of GNC, you had protein that was down 33%. This is just in terms of like their US corporate business. Sports nutrition was down 42%. Vitamins were down 18%. Health and beauty was down 36%. Wellness down 44%. Weight management down 46%. Food and drink, which is correlated very closely to like mobility in terms of the customer base, that was down 57% year over year. And this was really a bright spot for GNC over the last probably 2 years as the overall sports nutrition category shifts over to active nutrition, a lot of like ready to eats, ready to drinks. You also had herbs and greens, those were down 31%, and then just general merchandising was down 42%. So not much from a bright spot there. Vitamins, I think, is kind of a natural trend with a lot of people trying to figure out what can they take from a proactive standpoint to maybe mitigate some of the risk with COVID-19. But some of the other categories that were down extensively, it kind of confuses me, and maybe GNC did not do the best job at messaging and really being at where customers are trying to search their information. This is a little bit different than what we saw with the Vitamin Shop's quarterly earnings and how well they did at certain product categories to get search traffic through their corporate blog, that they did some shift in the way that they were presenting information appropriate to the health pandemic that we're dealing with. I do want to talk about store optimization plan. Obviously, they are going through bankruptcy and they announced some huge cuts in terms of stores. This kind of updates you where they're at now. At the end of quarter 2, so June 30th, the overall store fleet number was 6,736. That was down 1,284 year over year. Of those 1,284 stores, they were comprised of 715 U.S. corporate stores, 137 U.S. franchise stores, 57 international locations, and 375 Rite Aid store-within-a-store concepts. And that was mostly from when Walgreens purchased a portion of the Rite Aid store fleet. Any of the store-within-a-store concepts within Rite Aid that got flipped over to Walgreens did not stick. And then since we're talking about stores, just kind of a little bit update around like what happened during the quarter of COVID-19 in terms of some of the store closures. Because of that, at the peak, it reached approximately 1,400 stores that were closed because of COVID-19 in the US. But most of those have steadily opened, and they are now just over 100 locations that are closed at the end of this quarter because of that. That's not also counting a lot of the store locations that had restricted hours or some other kind of operating challenges that GNC had to overcome during the quarter. They didn't really break out the exact number. There's a number of locations that were closed and will not reopen. They were on the store optimization plan to close anyways. A lot of those had maybe leases that came up that they decided not to renew for another year, or they just decided to keep it permanently closed because of what was happening with COVID-19, and they didn't think the economics worked during the current bankruptcy phase. So I want to shift this into bankruptcy and give you guys some updates around the Chapter 11 bankruptcy with GNC. Filing, when that did occur, had a stalking horse agreement, as I mentioned in the earlier videos, a stalking horse agreement is basically to set a floor for the bankruptcy auction. So that was originally kind of put in there, but we didn't know much around the details of what that overall number was going to look like for Harbin Pharmaceutical, how they were going to kind of bucket out that payments in terms of purchasing GNC. And it has not been formally agreed upon with the bankruptcy court at this point. I think that is what the court date entails this week. So GNC unfortunately still has to keep yelling, show me the money. Did a terrible job. So let me see if Tom Cruise can help me out a little bit on that one.
Show me the money!
Harbin Pharmaceutical's stalking horse offer, now the details have kind of emerged, and they are going to purchase GNC for $550 million in cash, with also an assumption of certain liabilities. They will pay off $210 million in GNC's secondary loans. They also will allocate $10 million in a junior convertible note for some of GNC's unsecured creditors, and will assume most of their operating and other liabilities, which helps out a lot of their vendors that are going through this transition with them. They were on the hook, some of them, for more than $5 million. So this is a relief in some sense if a lot of that is going to be paid off with Harbin Pharmaceuticals. Obviously, they're going to have probably some different terms and a lot of things that will have to be crossed from a case-by-case perspective on each brand, but that is a little bit better news for some of the vendors within GNC. To pay for this, Harbin Pharmaceutical will borrow $400 million from the Bank of China and will also receive $150 million in secondary financing. So outside of the court date this week around the stalking horse offer, there are a few other court dates to kind of pay attention to. September 11th, that's the bidding deadline. So if anybody wants to outbid Harbin Pharmaceutical, or for whatever case Harbin Pharmaceutical's bid does not get approved by the court, they have until September 11th, and the specific auction is scheduled for September 15th. A hearing will be on September 17th to hear whether Harbin Pharmaceutical or another bidder ends up with the GNC asset out of the bankruptcy court. But if for whatever reason deals fall apart, they don't get approved, GNC decides they don't like the deal for whatever reason, or courts don't sign the documents by September 24th, and the closing doesn't occur by October 15th, there could be a lot of other kind of things that happen with the GNC bankruptcy. So covering a little bit about those what ifs. GNC did file another reorganization plan along with that stalking horse offer. So they did believe they might have to deal with this and go on without a buyer, but that needs to be approved. And if for whatever reason the Chapter 11 process gets drawn out, that hurts GNC with bad press. People think they're going out of business. It hurts them with vendors, suppliers, employees, franchises, you name it. It hurts that relationship with them. And if all that kind of falls apart, nothing kind of happens, that Chapter 11 will move into Chapter 7. And that's what GNC does not want to happen, because then their assets just get liquidated.
Thank you so much for watching this video. If you want to help support me, make sure you guys hit that thumbs up button on this video. If this is the first time you've been introduced to my videos, would love for you guys to be a part of my community by subscribing to my channel. I upload several videos just like this weekly. And if you guys want to connect further outside of this platform, I do include all of my social media links down below. I just want to thank you guys again for your time. Hopefully I gave you some value in return, and we'll see you guys on the next video.